Uh, all right. For our final speaker, I would like to introduce Aliakai, who is a polytheist YouTuber and author who focuses on the revival of classical era Athenian Hellenism. She has a passion for indigenous and environmental activism, and her mission on YouTube since June 2020 has been to make good historical research more accessible to polytheists who feel the call from the Greek gods.
All right, thank you so much. So for those of you who don't know about my channel, it is specifically focused on both the promotion of polytheist viewpoints and the way of life for folks who might be struggling or early on in their path. So I do a lot of what I call my Pagan 101 videos, where I talk about topics like the one I plan on discussing today. I also do a lot of basic and lately more advanced Hellenist topics to try to make historical scholarships more accessible to the general public, because unfortunately, as anybody who's ever been in academia knows, there is quite the price tag attached to getting access to a lot of current and historical research, including if you don't have access to a university, there's a lot of things that you're going to have a very hard time getting your hands on. So with that in mind, I'm talking about something a little less formal. So my talk, I guess, I'm hoping to be more of an opening to a dialogue than itself being a presentation of a paper of any kind, because that's sort of how I do my presentation. So if this is a little less formal sounding, apologies if that's a problem, but I tend to be a bit blunt and say it as it is. So with that in mind, we're talking about a concept called latent Christianity, which a few years ago, a fellow YouTuber named Ocean Keltoy coined the term for a concept that, let's face it, revivalist polytheists and pagans have been grappling with for as long as revivalist movements have existed. Latent Christianity is, in short, lingering Christian attitudes and assumptions that cling to our perceptions after deconversion. Now, I personally also extend this definition to include cultural forces that can shape our worldview, even for those that have never been Christian, but grew up in cultures predominantly influenced by Christianity. There's a similar effect for other orthodoxic traditions after deconversion, such as the various traditions of Islam, but the one that I've come the most in contact with and thereby feel the most comfortable talking about is latent Christianity. These can be small things. The expectation that, say, priests should perform marriages and funerals, which is not necessarily true in a lot of indigenous traditions, or much larger ideas like lingering divine command theory or an attitude in religion that might not necessarily support that idea. I'd like to give one other quick aside here. When I refer to polytheists generally, I'm going to use the term pagan, as it's the term that I'm the most familiar with and identify with personally, as well as the term that's most commonly used by revivalist polytheists to identify themselves within the communities I run in. If you find it offensive due to historical context or don't identify with it, feel free to substitute the word polytheist, as I mean them to be synonymous for the purposes of this talk. I know that there are atheopagans who don't believe in the gods, but the central point of my portion of this discussion pertains uniquely to polytheists, so I'm not really talking about atheopagans here. With that said, the most common example given in discussions of latent Christianity is the self-doubt and lingering feel of hell that a lot of pagans feel after deconversion or during the early parts of their journeys into pagan traditions. This fear can manifest in the form of nightmares or panic, or it can strike in the middle of a ritual where suddenly, mid-prayer, you wonder, am I actually praying to the God that I think that I'm praying to? Or is there something else on the other side? Am I praying to this deity, or am I praying to this previous Christian God? Which I don't know how many of you deconverted from a more orthodoxic tradition, but early on in my journey, that was certainly a struggle that I had. Who amongst revivalists hasn't had that lingering doubt? What if I'm actually sacrificing to demons like my priest or pastor told me I am? What if I'm gonna burn for eternity? Often these doubts pass with time, but that can be particularly brutal and lingering for the while when they're around. especially from folks who came from fire and brimstone denominations of Christianity or those who deconverted from an Islamic faith. This can later transform into a need to be absolutely right, whether it's a form of orthodoxy in which those who don't believe the same things epistemologically and theologically as you are labeled heretical in traditions that have a rich history of philosophical inquiry into the nature of the divine, or at least don't have a lot of surviving signs of orthodoxy. Or it can manifest in the need to replace the authority of a single text like the Bible with an overbearing authority of historical scholarship, which I might add often disagrees with itself and suffers from its own biases. I have videos on that if you decide to check out my channel after the talk, and Dr. Butler actually wrote excellent work on it as well, which he kindly helped me out with that video. So thank you so much. It can also metamorphose into an aversion for certain terms that would be essential to a tradition, terms like worship or offer. Although kneeling in prayer wasn't necessarily traditional in Hellenism, or at least not the era that I'm reconstructing, it was in religions like heathenry and some Celtic traditions. But the need to distance themselves as far as Christianity creates an aversion to concepts that are central to a tradition's view of the human relationship to the divine in many modern pagans. Some pagans refuse to even use the word prayer in the relation to their communication with the divine, which itself is the most central way in which communication is done in the majority of pagan traditions. And yet, the emphasis on this concept in a lot of Christian traditions has created this almost obsessive fear of associating ourselves in any way with those terms. Some people are even afraid to sing or dance if they came from more charismatic traditions, even though, again, these are ways in which our ecstatic expression throughout history, our ancestors of faith, or for those of us who came from traditions, I'm a multi-traditionalist. I practice a Haida faith, I guess if you want to call it, taught to me by my family when I was younger, as well as reconstructed Hellenism. These things are essential, both to surviving traditions and to reviving them. They were essential then, and they are now. Now, keep in mind, the tradition I'm most familiar with, aside from Haida, is revived Hellenism, specifically the classical Athenian Hellenism, which, although I know the term Hellenism has been used in scholarships to refer to the whole of classical Greek literature, it's also been adopted by the Greek pagan community well before I came into it to describe the revived religious practice. And I see these lingering attitudes ravaging my community with a distressing regularity. One of the ways in which Dr. Butler and I actually met was due to a major issue with Neoplatonist groups imposing orthodoxy on those of us who do not align with that particular philosophical worldview. And I actually critiqued some of his work in response to that because he was most often cited. Not through any fault of his, mind you. A lot of people are going to misuse your work no matter what you do. I've felt that personally. But they have decided to put themselves on a hierarchy above those of us who don't explore the divine in precisely the same way they do. And that was one of the things that actually got me into YouTube, to make the gatekeeping and accessibility that was going on in my own community around these things a little more open for folks who might not necessarily align with the specific methodology of exploring the divine that is imposed by Neoplatonism. Groups like the YSCE insist that only ethnic Greeks can define the future of Hellenism, despite a large population of non-Greeks expressing interest in the theoi and their ancient practices. Fights break out in forums over whether or not modern food items can be given as offerings, and cult leaders take advantage of the chaos to establish themselves as supposed priests, giving no mind to the role that priests actually played within the traditions that they claim to revive. Now, I can't blame any individual polytheist for these feelings and struggles that you might have with latent Christianity. Growing up in a predominantly Abrahamic culture will do this to anyone. And many of us in revived traditions are beset on all sides by a relentless cultural pressure to conform. The very definitions of religion that most folks, including many scholars, hold are Christianized. Oh, you don't have a central authoritative text? That's not a religion, that's a cult. You don't have a service with regular holidays that you attend? You must be delusional. Oh, your organization doesn't have a priesthood that's specifically ordained through a training ceremony to perform marriages and funerals? That's not a religion, and you won't get national recognition or protection for religious freedoms because it doesn't look enough like Christianity. I'm sure everybody on this panel and who's been watching has felt a little bit of pain there on that last bit. The mental health toll alone that these things take on the average pagan is enough to make your head spin. Yet we persist because we feel that drive to connect with the gods, to build a relationship of charis or reciprocity with them. Now, charis in ancient Greek meant many things. Calling it reciprocity and gift exchange hints at its meaning and purpose in Hellenism, but it barely scratches the surface. Etymologically, it means favor or goodwill, but also gratitude, thanks, influence, delight, gratification, grace, and elegance. According to Little and Scott's, a Greek English lexicon, it can mean a grace or favor felt on the part of a doer, but more frequently on the part of the receiver in the form of thankfulness and gratitude. It means a favor or gift return, the delight of that return, a thing done for another's sake, and the pleasure it is done for. These favors are freely done out of kindness, and this is how it is used when we refer to the gods and the gift exchange between us and them. The gods need nothing of us, but through their greatness and our love of them, we offer and build our relationships through a lifetime. Charis is the purpose of offering, but also its action. It's a word that embodies layers of concepts in ancient religion and wraps itself in prayer, ritual, spectacle, festival. It is, for lack of a more concise definition, the culmination of the relationship each individual has built with each god, and also the gods as a whole, along with the community standing in the eyes of the gods and the god in question. Looking at this definition alone, it's easy to see how these latent attitudes can get between us and that which we seek to build with the gods on both an individual and community level. The simultaneous push away from that which is Christian and towards similarity for the potential acceptance and legitimization hurts even the most self-reflective among us. Nowhere is this seen more than in discussions of the future of pagan traditions through the young, as the perpetual need to fight over whether or not it's even appropriate to teach our traditions to our current or even theoretical future kids, and in what way is a war fought continuously in these revivalist communities. Not until they're teenagers is one camp, never at all, let them discover it themselves is yet another. Yes, but only if we insist that it's not the only truth and encourage exploration when they're older. Absolutely why would I keep a major part of my life away is the last position most often felt. The last of these is often met with accusations of brainwashing because it looks too much like what? Christianity. So what are we as a community to do about this? Introspection is a fantastic start, even if you didn't deconvert from a Christian tradition. I've met pagans who started as atheists and still try to seek an absolute universal truth or impose a hierarchy onto gods across traditions that may not be there simply because they had absorbed the idea that it must exist from their surrounding culture. There have been movements in India to de-Christianize some parts of Hinduism that folks in these places perceived as having changed itself to conform to the expectations of former colonizers. On a community level, however, we need to start a wider conversation amongst ourselves about what it means to be members of a particular pagan tradition. Questions like, what should our priesthood, if one is ever established for specific traditions within wider religions, look like? Should we conform to the Christian expectations of what priests do in order to gain legal recognition internationally for our revived faiths? Should we settle, as many organizations have, for protection as educational or historical organizations and risk individual members having to claim to be Wiccan in order to have their rights respected? What does it mean to be a member of a specific tradition? Does a Wiccan who worships Zeus in the Wiccan way qualify as a Hellenist, or is there a standard of praxis or knowledge that qualifies you to be a member of a specific tradition? Is it a matter of self-identification, or do we need a more centralized set of organized bodies to represent various traditions and make historically accurate praxis more easy to access for those who feel the call from the gods? My mission is the last bit as a YouTuber, though I have little interest at present in creating some sort of centralized organized body. I've tried to create a series of free videos to make introductory Hellenism of a specific flavor easy to access for those who feel the need to connect to the Theoi, because to me, Charis is the core of what being a revivalist pagan is all about. We didn't come to our traditions to bicker over the proper incense offering to Zeus. We came to connect with the awesome being he is and the other gods are. Some came to connect with their roots, others feel a calling or had a divine experience, but what unites us is the desire to connect. And if we don't stop to examine these biases and the way that they divide us, both from each other and the gods, we'll have no hope of seeing these revivalist movements continue into the future beyond us. Thank you.
All right, that was fantastic. What a great set of papers. You know, I'm just going to say that I've attended a lot of conferences in my time, and if I could think of a time when I've seen panels with papers of the consistent quality of the ones that I've seen at this conference, I can't remember when it was. So I want to thank all of the presenters.